That's a good start. Thank you.
Hello, Darren. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for coming. Hello, thank you everybody for sticking in Belfast for the 12th of July fortnight, which has been my first in some time. And Darren, thank you for making the trip all the way from Iraq, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, quite a shift.
Kurdistan, depending on who you're asking.
Okay, yes. Quite a shift in geographical weather terms,
Exactly.
but possibly, well, anyway. So, Darren, you have joined us here today to talk about, the idea of this festival is to talk about perspective. And we brought some brilliant people here and talking about their work. And the film that we selected together was to show One Strange Rock for obvious reasons for the context of this festival. But you are a pretty unique filmmaker. And there's a lot of people who are very interested in film in this room. Is that you always knew from a very early age that was going to be the execution of the way that you saw the world?
Through making
film,
movies.
through the medium of film?
No, I really didn't have any exposure to what a filmmaker was. Growing up as a kid in South Brooklyn pre-internet times, there wasn't really a lot of knowledge in the world about how movies were made, all the way far away from Hollywood in New York City. So I didn't really know till I was probably a sophomore or junior in university that there was possibly something like a career and that there was a way of maybe doing this. But even back then it was early days. There weren't really many books. There weren't really a lot of knowledge about how to promote a movie or get a movie out into the world. So I kind of had to figure it out. I was always attracted to storytelling and I thought, oh, what is it? I thought about being an actual oral storyteller type of thing, which didn't exist either as a job, but I always liked that idea of telling stories since I was a teenager. So I think I fell into cinema because it at the time was probably the most modern way of telling and communicating stories to a large audience.
But did you know right away that it was a medium that you understood, or did you have to do a lot of learning on that journey to actually making something that resembled?
It was both. I was definitely a TV kid and grew up with a lot of television.
Yeah.
My generation, I was born the year Sesame Street started, so I was the first generation of kids placed in front of a TV instead of a babysitter. And I think a lot of that knowledge sort of drifted in through watching many, many hours of TV. And then as I got older, I was lucky to stumble on independent cinema. There's one in Brooklyn. There was one kind of mall. It's a very urban kind of place, and there was one mall back in the day. And I went, and they had a multiplex, and we were going to see one movie, and it was sold out. And there was another movie playing, and there was a goofy guy with a Brooklyn hat, and it turned out to be Spike Lee's She's Gotta Have It. And there was still a few seats for it, and I walked in, and I was with three friends, and it was packed, but there were only 3 seats left, so we had to spread out. And I remember sitting alone, and the movie had started, and it was this, I don't know if you've seen She's Gotta Have It, Spike Lee's first movie, but there's this incredible montage where all of these different men hit on Nola Darling, and it's just a montage of their different pickup lines. And I had never seen anything like that before on the screen. And so it just really excited me and just got me thinking about movies.
Here's a way that you can show something. There's time, there's space, there's music, there's dialogue. All of these things mixed together. Actually, a filmmaker from here, Glenn Leyburn, when he saw my work process, recognized how similar the early stages of making a book are to making a film. And it's a strange thing. It's like almost nothing that I've ever created has turned out exactly the way that I thought it would. You got to sort of react as you go. But I do it on my own, whereas filmmaking, in some ways, is one of the truest forms of collaboration because there's so many people involved. But yet, your films somehow are so uniquely you.
Yeah, but they are big collaborations. How you make it your own is you work with the best people you can, and you figure out how to use the contributions that they can bring to help amplify what you're trying to do.
Right. Okay.
So it's about guiding everyone down the same path so that they're telling the
So
same story.
it's not actually about you. It's about the idea that you have that you're trying to.
Yeah, but that's all about me. So.
Yeah.
No, I mean ultimately there's a theme that all the films sort of follow, and it's definitely related in a lot of the work. But different collaborators bring different possibilities, so you have to constantly improvise. So, I mean, a really good example is I was incredibly formal filmmaking in The Fountain, where every single shot was shot listed and thought out, and I worked on every shot for years. And then suddenly I was making The Wrestler with absolutely no money, and this actor, Mickey, who couldn't really repeat. Every time he did something differently. So I realized I couldn't really be the same type of formal filmmaker, because he just technically didn't work that way. So I just reinvented my style to sort of figure out it. And then that just became sort of me, but it was something I had never done before.
So you mentioned there that there's a sort of similar themes that run through them all, but all the films seem so radically different from each other. Do you recognize what some of those through lines are?
Well, it's been pointed out to me that every single character dies at the end of every one of the movies. So.
But don't we all? I mean,
Well, there you go. And for some reason, no one else sort of puts that in movies, but it's there all the time. So I don't know. I think there are similar themes that going throughout it, but it's not a conscious effort to put that in. They just sort of end up that way.
films about what you're interested in.
Yeah.
And then what you're interested in is sort of following up.
Yeah. And my new film that's going to come out in the fall, it actually is very, very different. It's written by this great writer, Sam Hunter, and it's his kind of masterpiece, and I was just lucky enough to kind of interpret it for cinema, but I decided to work with it because I was able to connect to a lot of the ideas in it. So
Now, why do you lean into darkness in the way that you do? Sorry, I didn't prep you for this.
No, I think it's complicated, and there's probably many ways to answer it. The first thing that comes to my mind is I definitely came to age watching movies in the 80s, which is the kind of George Lucas, Spielberg era, with the memory of the 70s, which was floating around. The 70s were incredible dark, and then the 80s were very light. And so I think there was a reaction against that in some way.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. There's almost this lack of vocabulary about just mortality and the you know.
I think the tragedy is a form that Hollywood cinema has not really focused on, but it's of course an incredible form because it actually leads to catharsis, and that leads actually to happiness. By watching other people's misery, you can live a better life in a lot of ways, because you can sort of travel through that darkness, and it can actually present ways of that can help you navigate.
Yeah, and if anybody was here for the Stefan Sagmeister talk, he talked a little bit about that. It seems that people are most fascinated in all news stories about when other people suffer that are not them. And I wonder if that's almost like practice for when it's you. You know,
Right.
there's a selfishness inherent in all human endeavor.
I also think that we're all really very gray, and that most characters you see are either very, very black or white. And I've always been attracted to characters that are closer to reality. I think that's where I've sort of been chasing reality more than anything. Even though my films can be very stylized and not fully realistic, like The Wrestler, which is very realistic, the other films are much more stylized. I think, but within that, emotionally, I'm always looking for truth and real emotions from my actors. And so I think the only way you do that is by representing how we all really are, which is a blend of it. And I think that's something that's very easily forgotten in these times, is how complicated we all are, and how important it is for all art to reflect that.
This is the last hard question, I promise. Now we're going to talk more in the... Maya Angelou has said that nobody remembers what you say, they just remember how they make you feel. How do you want people to feel?
I think it's about reminding ourselves of how complicated we all are. You know, cinema, the great thing about cinema and storytelling is that it can transform you and transport you into another person's shoes somewhere else on the planet. And that's the great gift of cinema, is it's an exercise in empathy. More than any other art, you can be in Paul Newman's eyes and in his mind and know exactly what that character is feeling. You can be with a 13-year-old girl in a favela in Brazil, like my friend Paxton, who's here, directed a film called Pacified that's coming out this year. You can be with a 80-year-old person dying in France. There's just so many different characters that we can all go to, and I think what cinema does is it shows you that we all have and share these incredible emotions. It's like when I worked with Russell Crowe, what I realized about why he is this superstar is because he can look out the corner of his eyes, and with the flicker of an eyelid, everyone on the planet can interpret something about what he's thinking. And that's the amazing thing about great actors, is they kind of can help to unify us.
Yeah, that empathy on other people. So basically, to recap, you make films to remind everybody that everybody else suffers, and that can be very enjoyable sometimes. Okay.
To sum it up shortly. Yeah.
So One Strange Rock is quite a deviation away, because it's not fictional, or it's not using metaphor. It's I suppose it's a poetic documentary. Why did you make that jump to working with National Geographic on that?
Very early in my career, there was an executive named Peter Rice who liked my movies, and then he rose up in the ranks of Disney, and eventually was overlooking Nat Geo, and he knew about my interest in environmental causes. When I was a teenager, I was lucky to run into this organization that was a school that brought me into, that basically trained me as an ecologist. I went to Africa, I went to Kenya, and I studied thermoregulation in ungulates, and then I went to Alaska and studied seals. And so since then, I've had this real big interest in the green and the environment before everyone was focused on it. So I've been trying to figure out how to bring that passion to my work. And then Peter mentioned that they were doing this kind of big nature show, and asked me if I wanted to get involved. And it was just an exciting kind of turning point for me in my career. Yeah.
And we talked about this before. It was like you've sort of tried to personify the overview effect.
Yeah.
That astronauts go through.
Yeah, we stumbled on it. We knew we wanted to go around the world and be kind of like the National Geographic magazine, and have some animal stories and then have some human stories. And then we tried to figure out how to unify it. And someone on our team was like, what about astronauts? They're the only people that have seen it from above. And then through research, we started to run into this idea of the overview effect, which is this big idea. Basically, every single person who's left the planet, even Jeff Bezos, has this kind of change of consciousness where they suddenly don't see borders anymore. Basically, what your work is about.
Yeah, like they realize that Earth is just one giant single system.
Yeah, and that's a deeply emotional, spiritual, intellectual evolution that happens that quickly, which is why I do think Blue Origin and all of these other space tourism things are very interesting, because I think it is a consciousness lift for people.
So it could be an educational rather than a tourist endeavor?
I think it is. It's absolutely, well, I think all travel is educational. It's very important. That's a big, I went to Kurdistan to, basically fill in that empty part of the map. And it was amazing to be a few days ago in Kurdistan and in Iraq, because we have such limited information about it, but to actually be standing there and meeting the people and talking about the experiences they've had and seeing their country and seeing what they've been through and where they're going, it's suddenly like, oh, that part of the map now makes sense. Coming to Belfast, I've never been here for the first time, and learning a tremendous amount from your pops yesterday was moving as well. So I think, travel is information, but definitely leaving the planet and looking down and realizing that the peace walls, is that what you call them?
The peace walls,
Yeah, don't really exist from space, or none of the walls exist from space. I think is what we all need a dose of that.
Well, I think it wasn't Yoda who said that we hate what we fear and we fear what we don't understand.
Can't you do that in a better voice?
No. I draw pictures. I draw pictures. But okay, so this is my last question. We're going to open it up to the audience then. Like, you've traveled around and you've seen all these fabulous places that we're going to see in this film, and you're a very astute observer. I'm sure you're sort of seeing patterns that are happening right now globally. Are you optimistic? And I've been asking this question of a lot of the speakers. Are you optimistic about the future of civilization?
The future of civilization?
Yes, not the planet, because the planet's going to be fine.
Yeah. Well, it's not going to be.
Well, no, it'll not be habitable to human life possibly, but it's going to be around.
Humans here for a long time. I have to be optimistic because I think a lot of things are changing and things are going to change. And I think there'll be many, many unexpected things that we don't really understand will happen. And I think that we all have to lean into hope and into the possibilities. And I think for a long time, I've been making films about screaming about what's going on. Noah, I was trying to take the biblical epic and say, hey, this story of apocalypse is as old as the Bible, and in it is a righteous man who tries to save the animals. It sounds very similar to kind of what's going on now. And then Mother was very much a kind of primal scream to kind of wake up. And I feel that the conversation's changed, and that's hopeful. It's no longer everyone going, what are you talking about? Now everyone's like, oh yeah, it's happening, but what's happened is there's suddenly a lot of nihilism. And I think now our job as artists and humans is to start dreaming about what the future can be, and to start to stop painting the darkness and to start looking towards our common humanity and how we can all live together in a really good way. And as a microcosm, I mean, what you're doing here in Belfast, which basically sums up the story of fences and walls in such a microcosm. It's a really interesting place to think about that and see how, and appropriately call it the troubles, how we can get past the trouble.
Wow. I mean, that sort of sums it all up, really, doesn't it?
One thing about the One Strange Rock you're going to see, if some of you have seen, and probably made it to episode 3, right? How many have seen episode 1 of One Strange Rock? Oh, really?
I don't know if it's shown here. Is it?
It was on.
Yeah.
Maybe
people don't have HBO or National Geographic.
Yeah, but it was before Nat Geo. Anyway, that's good.
Disney Plus. Sorry, Disney Plus.
It was a 10. Just to give you background, it was 10 episodes. But what this was, it's really cool actually, because this really hasn't been shown. We took episode 1 and episode 10, which are the 2 best episodes of the 10 episodes. So you could skip 2 through 9, unless you really like it. And we blended them. And each episode kind of featured one of our 10 astronauts that's in it. And this is two amazing stories about 2 incredible astronauts, and there's some incredible stuff in it. So it's a really good hour and a half.
Do you know, just before we open up to the questions, I had to interview Nicole Stott for this project as well.
Awesome.
She is fantastic, but she said this that's really stayed with me. It was like, I think that our job as contributing members of civilization is to remind everybody that we are not passengers on this spaceship Earth, but we're all crew members. That's such a great mind switch that, you know, it's not, it's you got to pitch in. So, okay, I think we got about 10 minutes for questions. So do we have a roving mic or questions, or it's a pretty quiet room if somebody wants to shout out? We got one right here to start off, so.
Do you need a microphone?
Here, yeah, just take this one.
Hi there, I was just wondering, what's been your most memorable part of your career, and what's been your most challenging part of it?
Oh, we went there. Okay, thank you.
What was the first?
Memorable and challenging.
They're probably the same one. I mean, there's there's so many. I'll just give you one that sums it up. You know, there's sometimes there was a time when, memorable and challenging. The first thing that popped in my head is there was a premiere of The Fountain at the Venice Film Festival, and it was a world premiere. And there was a journal. Back then, you'd have two journalists from the Hollywood trade magazines would review your film. It was before there was the democracy of the internet, and everyone could write a review. And these two reviews would sort of define your life, or so it seemed at the time. And there was one review that was just so mean, and it was just basically, it was more of a personal attack on me than the review of the movie. And I knew the next day I had to do like 100 interviews. So it was a bad night, to say the least, trying to live with that.
Did any of the interviews bring up the review?
No, I mean, I think it was interesting.
Okay.
It was also a very kind time. People were I'm sure everyone had read it, but people sort of were very respectful. But it's a hard thing, but the nicest thing about movies is they go on, and I mean, of all my films, that's the one that was incredibly meaningful for a lot of people. My dad was dealing with cancer, and we were at this cancer institute in New York going to see his doctor, and there was like a 45-year-old guy in a wheelchair, really in bad shape, with his wife and his two young girls, and they were in the waiting room with us, and he recognized me and said that The Fountain changed his life and gave him a pathway to accept his death. And my parents, who never understood the movie either and probably agreed with that first review, started crying because it meant so much to them. So, you know, sometimes like the toughest moments can turn into the best moments.
Yeah. I suppose you have to ask yourself as creators, like, who are you making work for?
Yeah.
Just out of interest, how many actual filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers are here in the audience? There's a few. Okay. So put your hands up if you now have a question. While the mic is going to go to you, I'm going to ask you one quick question. Have you always known that you were going to be a big deal and a success, or have you ever second-guessed your own ability?
I mean, I don't think I knew. You know, I don't think any of this was real. I just, and I wasn't chasing success because I didn't really even know that it was a possibility what it would be. Yeah. It was really coming from, I really enjoyed cutting. Basically, my college roommate, who knew what he wanted to do, which was make animated films, was a really bad editor, and this is when you used to have to cut film with literal razor blades. And he would reach across to grab a piece of film and slice his arm open on the razor blade, and he'd come home and he was all bloody. And I was like, oh, I felt bad for my roommate. So I was like, look, let me do it. And I was just very neat, and I could cut it, and I would do all of his cuts for him and do the tape. And so I was like, oh, this is fun. And when I felt the power of a cut, like a power of a really good cut, you know, there was an emotional feeling. And it was the first thing I had ever felt that Because you go to college, I don't know how many, it feels there's a lot of young people here. When you go to college, it's okay not to know what the heck you're going to do. Actually, do they let you not know what you want to do in Ireland? Or do they make
No,
you
it's so
choose?
the system's geared towards figuring out who
Figuring
you
out,
are
right.
when you're
I know
14
that.
years old, when you
Yes,
start picking
that's a little messed up.
GCSEs. But the secret to life is understand that most people don't really know what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. I think it's fine to it will. I think just have faith that it will come, and eventually it does.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm enjoying it so much. The thing I wanted to ask you about, I was interested, you talked about so-called peacefuls, and then you're touching on integrated education as well. And I suppose my question is to ask you, I mean, how do you turn the personal into a global theme?
The personal is the global. The more personal it is, the more global it is. The more honest it is, the more global it is. It's all about the honesty.
Yeah.
It's like if you really, really, the personal doesn't matter because we're all ultimately doing the same. People are dancing around the world. People are singing. People are drawing. We're all doing the same arts all over the planet. We're all trying to eat well. We're all trying to love our family. It's all the same. Everywhere you go, it's all the same. It's just expressed differently. And the more personal you can make it and show the details of whatever makes you culturally unique or not even culturally unique, what makes it personally unique is the beauty that you can share through cinema.
And that's when you find your voice. And so the person who introduced us to each other was the French artist JR, and he says something brilliant on this theme. It's like making good art is about being willing to fail publicly. To fail publicly. Put yourself out there. As artists, the more selfish you are, the more generous you are in some ways, and that hits the nail on the head. Okay, how are we doing on time, by the way? I have no idea. Okay.
I'm okay.
Hello, my name is Olga, and thank you so much for everything you do. I'm a big fan of Black Swan, and I've been showing it to all of my friends, and every single person has a different point of view of what is this film about. So there's no better time than now to ask you what is it about? We have so different opinions about it.
I mean, ask me a take on it. I'll tell you if you're right, but I can't tell you what it's about. I have no idea.
It's funny though, because artists get asked all the time, "What's that painting about?" And it's like, I can't tell you because it speaks. It's art transcends words. It's like the. But I do remember being in studying A-level literature and studying Sylvia Plath poetry, and the teachers dissecting. I was like, well, clearly this is what Sylvia meant by this, and this, and I remember at the time thinking, did she?
Yeah.
Really? And but by making art and putting it out there in the world, at a certain point, it's not up to you.
Yeah.
What it's about.
That's true. You often don't know what it's about until you're talking to people or the press about it, and they start telling you things about it, and you go, oh yeah, that's what it's about.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to hear what you think it's about, but I can't really tell you what it's about.
Did you hear what my dad said yesterday? And I absolutely threw away a brilliant line. I was like, I asked him what he thought about something. I was like, well, I don't know what I think until I hear myself say it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay, do we have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay, so down here, yeah. If you just want to, there's a microphone coming. And then I think we are going to show One Strange Rock.
Hello. Big fan. I'm just going off the Black Swan thing. I don't know if you know this, but you have a bit of a big queer following in your movies. Obviously, the best queer movie made was Fried Green Tomatoes.
Was it?
Yes.
I wouldn't have picked that one, but okay.
What would you have picked?
I mean, Paris is Burning. Have you seen it?
I have. Fried
Okay.
Green Tomatoes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's the first one that popped in my mind,
I
but
just
Fried
want to know if I would love to see your take on like an obviously darker version of that, and then going
on
off
Fried
that.
Green Tomatoes.
Oh, I think there could be something in this.
Following off that, how do you as a filmmaker feel about remakes?
Oh.
Yeah.
In general, or me remaking something?
In general.
In general.
Like, remakes. No.
Yeah.
Over like lockdown and COVID, everyone was coming like with remakes.
Oh,
It
yeah.
just seemed a bit lazy. Maybe that's the wrong word to use, but
Yeah.
it's been described.
Safe.
as
I would say
lazy.
safe.
Safe. Yeah, that's another good word to use. Yeah.
Look, it doesn't really fully interest me. I think there's something interesting about when filmmakers go to a great text that's been redone. So like redoing Macbeth by Joel Cohen was interesting.
Like the Noah story, for example. That's
Is that a-
class that as a remake.
Well, no, I think there's two
Well,
different
that- no, that-
different types of filmmaking. There's that which is generated as an industry, which is entertainment, making money, and then there's that which is art, which is people expressing.
Yeah. I mean, I remaking a film, it's a huge challenge to remake a great movie. And I'm not sure why you would want to put yourself against that. Like I have been asked over the years to do, sometimes you remember they did the Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, and Woody Allen did each little shorts, and they did a movie. And then they do these like I Love New York and I Love Rio, and they do all these shorts, and they've asked me to do those. And they pay you a lot of money, and you have to do a little and I just always felt like, I just don't want to ever be compared to another filmmaker. So I don't really want to get into competition. I'm not interested in it. And I think there's enough ideas out there that there's stuff to make that just hasn't been seen. There are plays out there that I'd be interested, that have been turned into films that maybe I'd be interested in maybe doing one day, but I don't know, not too much.
Not Fried Green Tomatoes anytime recently then, no?
Fried Green Tomatoes by me. I don't think that's my calling this week. We could probably do one more question after the Fried Green Tomato question.
Let's do one more question. So if you get to there we go.
It's just a yes, no. It's very simple, so we'll be quick. Thanks for coming to Belfast, by the way. That's
Thank you for having me.
the
Well,
wrestler-
thank Oliver for bringing me.
The Wrestler and Black Swan feel like a companion piece. Did
Yeah.
you plan it that way, or was it just accidental?
No, very much. When I was in a very early stage, it was one movie where a wrestler and a dancer a ballet dancer were together, because I saw the connections between the two arts, and then it split into two movies. So there was connections, but definitely I saw the connections thematically, and I thought it was really interesting that what many people would consider not even an art, except for wrestlers, which is wrestling, where the athletes are exactly the same as the highest art, ballet, right? Where artists also put their bodies at risk, and they're willing to sacrifice their bodies for their art. And there's a very, very small time frame when they can do their art, and that it's performative and doesn't exist outside of the initial performance. Those kind of connections really excited me, and then using the same type of camera to connect them, which was a handheld camera. That was a conscious effort to pull together, because I couldn't really find a horror film that had been done handheld. And I was very concerned when I started to think about, okay, we're going to do because the wrestle was handheld because it was a documentary type of vibe to it, a verite type of vibe to give you like, oh, this is really happening. And I was like, oh, if we do that in a horror film, is that a problem? Because will the audience be thinking about the camera operator, the person holding the camera? Will that take away the fear because the character Nina is no longer alone in the room? Will they be thinking about the operator and the sound and all that stuff? Maybe I was, as a filmmaker, thinking a little too hard. So it didn't matter, but I was worried about it. And I couldn't actually find a handheld horror film. So that was the risk of that, but it ended up kind of bringing the films closer together.
So yes. Okay, we're gonna show the film now. But again, I just want to thank all of you for coming out on a Sunday night before the 12th of July.
Thank you.
And to thank you, Darren, for coming. And I don't care what everybody else says about you. I think you're all right.
All right, thank you.
And it fills me with hope and gratitude that somebody who is such a master of their craft and so in tune with their surroundings, environment, is as young as I am, and you've I think the best work is ahead of you.
How much older than you?
I'd like to. Yeah, well, no, we're peers. We're peers.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. Please enjoy One Strange Rock.